So, hello everyone. I am Julie Bless, and I'm the statewide wildlife education coordinator for the Nevada Department of Wildlife. I also do our volunteer program. I am a certified interpretive guide and a certified interpretive guide trainer. And I'm going to spend the next 30 or so minutes with you sharing some tips and tricks on sheltered English instruction. And I really want to set the stage here that I am not the expert. I'm not an expert by no means. I was just really fortunate enough to work under someone in the Park Service who was very experienced with this and passed down some of these tips and tricks for us. This person had a lot of experience. Her name is Katie Phillips. She still works at Rocky Mountain National Park. And we got to use some of these methods and have kind of taken those into other parts of my career. So this really is the tip of the iceberg on this topic. And tips and tricks is accurate. So these really are things that you can take right away and put them into programming very easily. And this is not a deep dive. These methods can be easily incorporated into programming. And I hope that you are super comforted by the fact that almost nothing I share with you is going to be super new. A lot of this is just good education, good interpretation. So let's get started. So I've gathered you all here today. Let's put our imagination cap on, and we are going to learn how to use a chainsaw with this very well done YouTube video. And I'm actually going to scroll because there's a lot of narrative at the beginning that isn't very instructive. So hopefully you can hear this, but I'm going to scroll to where the actual instruction starts. Because using a chainsaw is super important, and there might be people in here that are already expert chainsaw users. All right.
Bezpieczeństwo. Odpowiednia odzież jest tu bardzo ważna. Nawet jeżeli tniesz jedynie drewno do kominka na tyłach własnego domu, musisz pracować w odpowiednim stroju zgodnym z zasadami BHP. Najlepszy wybór to dobrze widoczna, przewiewna kurtka ochronna i spodnie z zabezpieczeniem antyprzecięciowym. Oczywiście odzież ochronna nie zapobiegnie wypadkowi, ale może znacznie ograniczyć jego skutki. Obuwie powinno mieć stalowe noski, wyraźny bieżnik i być zabezpieczone przed przecięciem. Oczywiście potrzebujesz także kasku z pełną osłoną oczu i ochronnikami uszu. Zawsze miej pod ręką zestaw pierwszej pomocy. Dobrze jest również mieć przy sobie telefon komórkowy i gwizdek, aby w razie potrzeby szybko wezwać pomoc. Dłonie ochronisz, zakładając solidne rękawice. Jeśli nie masz doświadczenia, staraj się pracować w towarzystwie drugiej osoby. Spędź trochę czasu zapoznając się z pilarką, sprawdź na jakiej zasadzie pracuje i poznaj jej najważniejsze elementy, zwłaszcza te, które decydują o twoim bezpieczeństwie.
Okay, I'm going to pause that because you get the point. You're probably not going to effectively learn how to use a chainsaw from someone who speaks a language that you don't speak. I've never noticed the captions on that. It was not translating, so I do not know what they were actually saying. Obviously, they were showing us, we know safety material. I think this is obviously an advertisement for Husqvarna. So you have to have, from this, I garner that you have to have Husqvarna branded safety stuff. Otherwise, you are not going to be able to properly operate this chainsaw. But the point is that we have all sorts of people that come to our programs, whether they are coming from different communities or even coming from different countries. And some of them, English is not their first language. And this is where sheltered English instruction comes into play. So what is it? It is an approach to teaching English language learners in a way that integrates language and content instruction. And sheltered English instruction is a very top level way to teach in a formal classroom, which obviously isn't what a lot of us are doing, but we can steal some of those methods and put them into our programming to make them more accessible and comprehensible. And we can even help promote some language development, especially with the language that we use. When most of us are talking about wildlife and the outdoors, those could be completely new words to a lot of people that they might not be learning in a different way. So and those are the two goals, is to provide access to mainstream content and to promote the development of English language proficiency, which those are pretty lofty goals, but we can help people by stealing some of these methods and putting them into our programming. Here are some very quick elements, and I shared in the chat, but it probably needs to be shared again because I know when you come into Zoom, you can't see what's already been sent, but there's a whole folder of resources, and one of those resources is this just quick handout, which is what I'm basically going to be going through today. There's, I think, there's 9 methods included on this, and here's a couple of them that we can, here's a couple of the elements, the main elements, and if you look at this short list, you probably see a couple elements that also mirror good interpretation, like a visual approach. We want to show, we don't want to tell. And using inclusive instruction, which are what these methods are, is just plain good interpretation and education. The hands-on cooperative learning, being sure to avoid jargon, which is some of that guarded vocabulary as well. And we are going to go through those more in depth. So why should we use this? So this is data from our Department of Education here in Nevada, and this is the student demographics from the last school year. And you can see almost half of our population in our schools is Hispanic Latino. So if you are targeting those students, you could be missing out, or you could be excluding them from some content if they are English language learners. We want to make sure that we're keeping them in mind. This is Nevada language by age. And so this is all ages. And you'll see that this right here covers almost a quarter of our population. So if you're going out and you're doing a public program and you're not taking into consideration that everyone's first language might not be English, you're excluding a lot of people. I think a quarter is way too many to be excluding. And something super interesting that I learned while looking at some of this data is that Nevada's second most spoken language after Spanish, that isn't English. So it goes English, Spanish, and then Tagalog. That's our third most spoken language in Nevada, which is really interesting. And that's that Asian and Pacific Island languages. So we have a quite large diversity of languages that are being spoken here in Nevada. And you can look this data up in your own state. I assume some of them might look a little bit different, but I think there's a lot of similarities too. This is for the entire United States, and you can see it does reflect what Nevada says as well. And these are languages spoken at home. The majority is still English, but there's still a very large population of people that are speaking other languages. So to keep our communications relevant, it's really important we consider these. We don't want to leave out almost a quarter of our potential audience. So these techniques that we're going to talk about, they're tried and true for working with audiences where English is not their first language, but they're also great for all languages or all learners with all different abilities. These techniques are good for both adults and children as well. So what I'm going to do is we're going to go into some of the methods, give some examples, and then if there's time and people have things that they want to share, I know this is not the best medium for sharing and discussion, but if people have used some of these methods or things that they've noticed, or maybe they've used some of this stuff, but they didn't know that it also was applicable to this as well, I would love to hear what you have to share as well. So I am going to share these 9 simple methods. They're on that form that is in that Google folder that is shared with you. And it is adapted from a document that I was given while I worked at Rocky Mountain National Park. And it's just a reminder to look at when you are creating programs. And I will say that some of this stuff can also be changed into non-personal items too. So Facebook posts, videos, webinars, for example, you can use some of these methods as well. All right, so we're starting with the first one. Well, we're technically starting from the second one if you are watching this, if you are looking at this document while we go through, but I'm saving the extra linguistic cues until the end because it has the most to talk about. So simplifying the input. And this sounds really easy, but actually takes a lot of thought, especially for us nerds that have a lot of information in our brains about the thing that we want to talk about or the thing that we want to share about. So it's important that we think about our sentence length, using shorter phrases, taking a little bit longer pauses, making sure that we are enunciating clearly, but not being too, not over enunciating, because that can be really offensive. That is not not usually a nice thing to do when you realize that someone doesn't speak English as their first language. Repeating yourself, being very careful with that, repeating yourself and speaking louder to someone when they're not understanding what you're saying is usually not effective. We want to make sure that we are rephrasing and also using our body language too. That's really important. Being mindful of the vocab that we use. So seeking out materials on the topic that you're sharing about with a lower vocabulary load, or with simplified text is very, very good. And repeating those vocabulary words. So if you know that you are probably introducing a word or a phrase that is probably new to this audience, you want to repeat it. You want to make sure that they're learning that word. So repeating that is very important. Another thing with simplifying the input is being consistent with the word that you use. For example, if you are doing a program on the ocean, use the word ocean when you're talking about the ocean. Don't switch between ocean and sea, because those words, those are two different words, even though they could mean the same thing. So making sure that we are using those consistent words, and then limiting idioms too. And there are a bunch of idioms here on the side that are kind of funny, but be careful when you use those, because sometimes people just do not understand what they mean, or they're taking it very literal. For example, they might not understand those. I used to work with 3 to 6 year olds, and these were not English language learners. These were just 3 to 6 year olds. And I used the term, you pulled my leg. Are you pulling my leg? And the student immediately looked under the table because they didn't understand what that meant. And so even when you're using these with audiences that aren't necessarily English language learners, you want to limit some of these, because the meaning doesn't always come across. Jargon, I think, is a huge problem with us in the wildlife sciences. A good example is, I know a lot of people in here probably know what the SWAP is, the State Wildlife Action Plan. And I've casually mentioned SWAP species to a teacher before, and they were like, what are you talking about? We definitely have our own little internal jargon that is not relatable to people that are outside of our little circles. So being careful of some of that jargon is really important. So limiting those idioms and reducing jargon is very important. Our next method is keeping it interactive. This is a no-brainer, I think. If you are putting on a program, or you're doing a bird walk, or even a webinar, keeping it interactive is really important. We want people to be actively learning. We don't want them just sitting there and listening to you talk. And there are a lot of great ways that I'm sure you all know how to do already. One good thing, or one not good thing to do, but a good thing to avoid, are those gotcha questions. And there's kind of 2 forms of gotcha questions. You can lead someone into a question like, don't you agree that so-and-so? Isn't it true that blah, blah, blah? Or you could ask a question that is so ridiculous that you know your audience is going to get wrong. Like, how many hairs are there on a black bear? People I don't know that. I don't know that information. It probably varies by bear. So that doesn't make your audience feel very good. I have seen that used in where it worked, where it actually was like this really engaging way, but I would suggest not using that. You want your audience to feel like they can trust you and feel safe with you. So maybe giving them a question that you know they're going to automatically get wrong right away is not a good way to start a program. and we don't want to discourage people from providing input either. I've got NPS handles on here, and that is a document that you can look up. If you just Google National Park Service handles, it is literally a glossary of interpretive techniques. And it also has a bunch of pictures of door handles on it. And that is why it is called handles. It might be an acronym, I'm not sure, but it's been around for a long time. And I think it's a great resource if you are talking about something and you're getting prepared to talk about it, or get a program ready or make a video and you're like, I do not know how to make this more interactive. You can look through there and get some inspiration, and it literally starts at A and ends at Z. Our next method is making it thematic. So I'm a little biased here because I am an interpreter. I am a big fan of interpretation. I am a trained interpreter. I train interpreters. And interpretation is all about theme. And so if you are an interpreter, you're probably already very familiar with this. We want to focus on those big concepts instead of those details. And this is important for all of the programming that we do. I really do suggest the Certified Interpretive Guide training through the National Association for Interpretation. It's a great training. We're trying to convince all our biologists to go through it since we have trainers on staff, but we'll see how far we go. But EPLI has a good online course as well that was called Foundations of Interpretation. I think they've updated it, but you can check that out too. But the theme, making sure that your program is thematic, or your video is thematic, or whatever product it is that you're creating. You want your takeaway program to answer the question, so what? Why are people coming to your program? What's the one thing that you want them to walk away with? And focusing on those big concepts over those small details is, if you want your takeaway from a program to be how we can respect the wildlife in our backyards, then don't spend 10 minutes of an hour-long program on the in-depth reproductive biology of American robins. They're not going to remember that much information, and they're definitely not going to remember that you want them to know how to respect wildlife. So making sure that we're thinking about those big concepts over those little details. Cooperative learning strategies is our next method. And this is, there's a lot of different ways to do this. And if you're unfamiliar, cooperative learning strategies are ways to get small groups of students or audience members, because you can do all of these things with adults as well. But getting them to work together and not necessarily having you talk to them. So Think, Pair, Share is a really good one. You can get them to the kids or your audience members to come together, think about a question, and then they share with the group, and every little group shares. You can also have them do small group activities instead of having the whole group do an activity together. When doing this, you want to make sure that the task is meaningful, that you're not just having them do something so that they just get to go and hang out with their friends and then come back. Make sure that it is a meaningful task. This can be really helpful too when you know that you are working with an audience where English is their second language, or they are English language learners, because you can let them or even encourage them to speak in their home languages. Now, I know if you're working with school kids, their teachers actually might not allow that. But if this is a public thing that's going on, there is no reason for us. It is not we are not formal educators. We do not have to keep them from doing that. There's no reason why they can't use their home languages in small groups with us. There is a great website called Color in Colorado, and it has a lot of information on how to teach to English language learners. But it also has a whole list of cooperative learning strategies that is really, really helpful, that I highly suggest you check out. And I have a whole list of links, and I can share at the end too. Modeling tasks and behavior is our next method. And this is a great way to avoid just giving instructions. You want to show and tell. So we want to model tasks. We want to show the audience first. For example, if you want your audience to, say you're doing like a BioBlitz, and you want everyone to have a data sheet and a clipboard and a pencil, show your audience what you want them to do. Grab a pencil, grab a piece of paper, grab a clipboard, and show them exactly how you want them to do that. And a hot tip, you should also show them how to put it back, because otherwise they're all going to come at you at the end and just pile everything up, and it's going to be a big mess for you. So you want to model that. Another thing is if you are on a trail walk or you're leading a birding hike, if you're asking your audience to be quiet and courteous and stay on a trail, you should do that as well. You should be showing them how to act in the environment and how to do the things that you're also asking them to do. Providing hands-on materials is another method, and this goes along with the with other ways for students to interact with you. So they can demonstrate new content knowledge to you without having to say it. So you can have them draw things, you can have them point to things, you can have them, you could do like a true false thing, like check for comprehension, and instead of having them give you an answer, you can have them demonstrate it by true people go over here, false over here. And this is a great way to give your students, your audience, your participants an opportunity to demonstrate that they understand what you're saying through actions, because there's a really good chance people are understanding what they're saying, what you're saying, but they don't have the ability to communicate it back to you in language. So we don't want to force a verbal answer if we realize that our audience is not comfortable with that. And here's an example. This is a program that we do, and it is not specific to English language learners, but this is an example of using hands-on materials to show comprehension. This is our fourth grade program called Know Your Nevada. And the first lesson, they learn about different habitats in Nevada, and then the stickers are state symbols. So they're coloring in where the appropriate habitats are, and then they're using the stickers to show where in the state those state symbols are found. And so we can look at their little map at the end, and we know that they've learned something. And that's a way that they can demonstrate that knowledge without using language. It's also really fun. This is just a little tip on clarification versus correction. And I am positive some of you in here have experienced this, you know, where you're talking to maybe your significant other and they just keep going, what, huh, what, huh, huh, huh. And you just keep repeating yourself and you're getting nowhere and both of you are frustrated. So maybe instead of asking what, huh, you could say, sorry, I'm not sure I know what you mean. Could you say it in another way? Could you show me what you mean? Could you rephrase it? So we don't want to correct errors, but just ask for clarification. If you hear someone respond to you and they are, you can tell that they're getting frustrated or they are pronouncing a word incorrectly, you don't have to correct them. You can just say the word correctly if you figure out what the word is, but you don't have to actively correct them. But asking for clarification and confirming understanding is really important. So patience is a big part of this. It's totally okay if people make mistakes. Younger audiences especially are really desperate to communicate. And it doesn't really matter if they're an English language learner or not. Kids are learning language around the same time regardless, and they want to communicate to you. I used to teach in bilingual classrooms as a substitute teacher because everyone else was too scared to do it. So I ended up in a lot of those classrooms, and it was great. It was not scary at all. But when you're a substitute teacher, you really don't know what's going on because a lot of times you teach at one school and then you go teach at another school. You never go back to that school, and their schedules are all different, and you are really not informed about it. You really are not. Subs have no idea what's happening. And we had to move from one place to another, and I had no idea what was going on, and I was taking them down the wrong hallway. And this lovely young lady was trying to communicate to me that we needed to go a different way. And she was getting really frustrated because I was having a really hard time understanding where she wanted me to go. And I finally just told her to hold my hand and take me there. So I'm not sure I handled it super well, but that was another way that she could provide me instruction without using language, which there was a clear barrier between both of us. And we got where we needed, and she luckily was very calm. And but being patient and listening to people and trying to get to the bottom of what it is that they're trying to say to us is really important. We want to clarify, we don't want to correct. We're getting down to some of our last methods here, but understanding the culture of the audiences that we are working with is really important. And I underlined know your audience because that is a part of everything we should be doing when we are working with groups of people, whether that is making a video to go to a specific audience or leading a bird walk. And even if it's like a bird walk where people anyone can show up or they pre-register, get there early and ask questions. You'll find out really quickly if there are any mobility issues, if there's any of those language barriers. If you have someone at your bird walk that is really knowledgeable about birds. So there's all sorts of reasons why you should get to know your audience, and this is just one of them. So learning as much as you can about the language and culture of your audiences is really important. Look at the data in your state, find out where they're coming from, what languages are being spoken at home around your area. Get in touch with those groups. HO is a great one. Outdoor Afro, if you have a chapter near you. We just connected with a great group called Blacks in Nature, which has been really fun, but that's a really great way to get to know some of these communities that you live around. And then you can find out as much as you can about how the ideas and concepts you're teaching will build upon your audience's previous knowledge or previous way of being taught. For example, if you know that you are working with a local tribe and you're talking about specific wildlife that they probably have learned about in creation stories. And that's a really good thing that you can know to do and reference in your programs. You can support the audience by using their home language if you are comfortable with it. And it is important to encourage using their home languages too. So we already kind of talked about that. We can totally do that. We can encourage people to use their home languages if it's appropriate. I know I'm not great at speaking Spanish. I'm even worse now because I don't speak it very often. But when I worked in Colorado, we were a part of a project called the Camp Moreno Project. And it was a really cool program where we got to bring specifically Hispanic families and Spanish-speaking families to the park to learn how to camp there. And it was a one night. They came on a Friday, stayed Saturday night, and then we took them around the park on Saturday. They packed up and went home. And it was a family program. So we had grandkids, parents, and grandparents. So very multi-generational. And with that, we had a lot of different language comforts with English. Sometimes the grandparents had almost no English where their grandkids were translating for them. And then the parents in the middle might kind of be able to grab from both. And we did sometimes teach in Spanish. Our Spanish was horrible. It was not good. We're okay. We can get the point across, but it was not, you could definitely tell we were not Spanish speakers. And I'm not saying you should do this all the time, but this is where you should know your audience. We had grandparents come up to us afterwards and they thanked us for attempting Spanish, and they said attempt. They did not say we were good, but they really appreciated the attempt. And we had a really good relationship with this group of people. So we knew that our attempt at least would be appreciated. Whereas other cultures, or even the same culture, but a different group of people, they might not appreciate that. They actually might find that somewhat offensive. So this is where knowing your audience and understanding the culture you're working with is really important. Using appropriate humor and sarcasm is also super important. Cultures are just very different. We want to make sure that we aren't taking one last step thinking we're being really funny when that does not translate. So being very very conscious of that. So knowing our audience, understanding those cultures, very, very important. And that's important for everyone that we're working with, not just the English language learners. So to wrap this up, I am going to talk about the extra linguistic cues. And these are very easy things that you can put into the products and programming that you are putting out right now, or you're already doing it. And I think this is kind of an oxymoron because extra linguistic cues is a very long word for something that means to use less words. We want to show and use visuals and props and labels that isn't necessarily incorporating a ton of language. And I think this is the number one and easiest thing to incorporate into your programming and have that high impact. So using visuals as much as possible. When we're doing bird walks or wildlife walks, there's no guarantee that you are going to see the animal that you're talking about. So we always have just some laminated, super high tech pieces of paper with the animals that you are talking about. Bird walks is great. You can even use white. This is, oh my gosh. No, okay. You can use a whiteboard marker on here. I did not, I laminated that under here, but you can use a whiteboard marker on these and not have it. And you can quiz them. Hey, we talked about the markings of this bird and then we saw the bird. So what's the bird? And now you've got this like double confirmation of what that bird is and then what the name looks like too. And you can label it. You've probably noticed that all of the photos that I've used in this PowerPoint presentation, every single one of them is labeled. And you can, I just used their common name. You can use this for scientific names. We did a bat program with one of our local tribes, and they talked about their bats in their native language. And that's a really cool thing that you could do too. So you could put multiple labels on these photos, and that's just another layer of exposing people to wildlife. And I am a real stickler about it too. The photos that I used in this PowerPoint presentation are all Nevada specific wildlife, so they are specific to our content. You can use whiteboards too. This is a really great thing. I'm all about low tech, low cost. It's a laminated white piece of paper on a clipboard. And we talk about bears a lot. You can talk about hyperphagia. That's a really big word. It's probably going to be a new vocabulary word for a lot of our audiences. Now they've seen it, they've heard you say it, they can look at it. Another thing you can do with these too is you can draw maps. When we have volunteers, I can draw a little map. I can show them. If they have questions, I can erase and clarify, and I can show the whole group this map. Another thing you can do with these is if you are leading like a nature walk and you see something super cool on the side of the trail, you can take this piece of paper out and have another blank one ready to go. And you can label something, say it's like a cool flower, and then you can leave it so that everyone who's behind you can see it and see that labeled flower and identified flower as they walk past. And hopefully you have another person or a volunteer behind you that can pick them up. And so that's a really good way that you can do it. You can use it. And this is another way to simplify that input. I'm really big about laminating stuff. If we're talking about spiders, I always have stuff laminated. We can point out different things, data sheets. If you are asking students to fill out data sheets, that you have a copy of it, and making sure that there's clear instructions on everything. And you can even give these to students to avoid wasting the paper too. And then they just fill it out on a whiteboard, give it back to you. Lots and lots of uses for that. This is an example of just using some of those photos. This is a colleague that I worked with at the International Crane Foundation, and she was teaching and sharing about our crane program. So luckily this was at a zoo setting, so the animal is there. You can see a real live whooping crane, but what you can't see is how they're reared, because the whooping cranes that are reared in captivity can never see humans because they get released into the wild. And so that's what she's sharing in that photo that is never visible to the public. I think they have a webcam now that can be more easily viewed, but there's something that people can't see, and she's going to be talking about it. So now she can talk about it and she can show about it. And she has one of the little hand puppets in her hand too. here's an example of a colleague at Rocky Mountain National Park, and we were doing a scavenger hunt. And so she had all of the scavenger hunt clues, not only in the little packets that the students had right here, but she also had them big in bigger font right in front of her. So every time they found it, they had it in two places. They could read it right in front of them. They could also look at the larger version of it in front of her as well. And this is just some other use for a whiteboard, if you so choose. They were doing, I don't remember what they were doing, but they found an elk skeleton and they labeled it. And I think they took a photo and took some measurements. And that was a group of students in Colorado. So I'm going to recap some of our methods here really quickly before we kind of get to wrapping up. And I have used this content to do a training with my staff that I'm hoping they're taking this stuff and passing it on to our volunteer instructors as well, because these are very easy, accessible things that we should be considering regardless of whether we know we're specifically working with English language learners. A lot of these methods are great for neurodivergent audiences, people who can't hear well, people who can't see well too. Some of this stuff helps when you are limiting some of the language that we're using. And we covered this PowerPoint on the first day, and then on the second day, I basically assigned them homework to look at a program that they do and add this in there. Take out some stuff, put in some stuff, not really changing the program as a whole, but making sure, like basically auditing their program and making sure that some of this stuff is included in it, and maybe subbing some of those words and making it more accessible to our audiences. So here are some of those methods. And again, that is on a sheet. So the extra linguistic cues, that was the last one that I covered, but I think it's the most important. So I put it at number 1, simplify the input, keep it interactive, make it thematic, use those cooperative learning strategies, model tasks and behavior, provide hands-on materials, clarification versus correction, know your audience and understand the culture. So that's really all that I have to share today. I would love to hear if anyone has other things that they would like to share that's related to this, or if there's any discussion. I haven't looked at the chat at all, so.
Thanks, Julie. There hasn't been any question in the chat yet, but if people have questions, you can raise your hand and we can call on you.
So Nancy just put in, she said, I would add, let them lead when possible. I think that's great. Dialogic interpretation is becoming a much more common topic, and I think the let them lead portion that you're bringing up is a really big tenet of dialogic interpretation.
And I just got a question of asking whether or not this is being recorded. Yes, it is. And I'm going to stop the recording or pause it in case there are any more questions that come up.